Hello, welcome to our counseling case interview presentation. Our group is Emily, Dodd, Freya, Harvey, and Tony. To start off, I'd like to acknowledge that our group is working, living, and presenting on the ancestral unceded territory of the Kootenai people. This means the people from the confluence of two rivers. Our scenario was that in a 6-7 class, the students are writing poetry during language arts. The teacher who's marking the poems that night comes across a poem that has suicidal thoughts, and one of the lines explicitly states the student does not wish to continue living. The teacher is deciding what the next course of action is.
So I will be presenting first. Before I get into who I interviewed, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we selected the scenario we did. So we chose this scenario because it's something that I actually experienced during my first practicum. I felt very unprepared when I went through this, and I thought that this would be really informative and helpful to select as our scenario. So that's why we selected it. I felt unprepared. I felt nervous. I did report to my coaching teacher, but I didn't learn about the process that happens following that. So that's what we wanted to get into. So I interviewed an elementary school teacher who has actually experienced this kind of disclosure in many different contexts. So not just suicide, but with abuse disclosures as well, through schoolwork, through provincial exams, all sorts of things like that. I've had kind of a negative attitude and perspective about this prior to my interview. I felt sad that this is what the student is going through. But after my interview, I came to realize that that student has felt safe enough to disclose, has felt okay being vulnerable, and it might even be a reach out for help. This provides us as teachers with the opportunity to take this disclosure and get them the help that they need. So I just really wanted to talk about how we go through the process of reporting this, who we report it to, and my questions and the answers that I got from my teacher have really shown me what to do if this happens in the future. So the first question I had is, what is the best way to approach a student about this and when? So immediately the next day at school, you should approach that student. You should approach them gently, calmly, and have a positive attitude about it. Listen to what the student says. After this meeting with the student, you should make some notes about what the student says and add that to your report as well. You should be transparent with the student that you did access outside resources, like you're going to contact administration as soon as you find this. So when you contact administration, you should always keep a record of what you're telling them. You should contact them through text message so you have hard proof of what you've said, or you should record your phone call. This is for your own report back, so you know what you've said, what you should add to this, and there's a beginning of a portfolio for you to go forward with. Also, if your relationship with the student is not strong, you should have a counselor with you. If you are early in the school year, you don't know the student very well, or if you're substituting, this counselor will help be somebody that the student can trust, and that trust is really important. You should never ignore a comment such as the one in our scenario, because that'll set a precedent that this is not important. And it is important, and it's important that the student knows that it is important. They need to know that their mental health is a priority over schoolwork, always, that mental health is what we are trying to make sure that the students are aware about. So my next question is, what are the policies from the teacher's perspective in this conflict? So as a new teacher, you might feel that you should contact the Ministry of Child and Family Development, so the MCFD, but don't do that yet. That's actually the last place you should go if the other methods don't work. Make sure when you call and call the administrator, you record your phone call. Keep those text messages, like I said in the last slide. Make sure that you've got all of your proof. You should contact an academic and therapeutic advisor. So this ensures that the student has those supports in the school. When you're reporting to administration, my teacher said that it's a really good thing to say. I am seeing evidence of suicidal ideation, and we need to address it as a team. This lets them know your intention of being included and lets them know what type of report this is. Following this, the student will need a VITRA assessment, which is a violent threat risk assessment. This lets you know if the child is planning to harm themselves and what type of steps you need to be taking to prevent this. So what should new teachers expect when reaching out for help for this student? So a new teacher might experience feelings of guilt, as you might feel you're betraying the student's trust when you report. This student has chosen to disclose to you, and you might feel that when you report it, you're breaking that relationship with the student. You're going to question yourself. You're going to question whether you're blowing this out of proportion, if it's as serious as it sounds. You're going to doubt your own judgment on this. You're going to feel shock. You're going to feel like you're not being a very good teacher. It is your duty to report. Does not matter your personal feelings about this. You need to get that child the help that they need. I think it's also important for you to take care of your own mental health, not only when you find these kind of comments, but just in teaching in whole. You're going to come across situations where it's going to impact you emotionally. I think that all teachers should be seeing a counselor. My teacher that I interviewed expressed this greatly. You should always be in contact with a counselor when you're dealing with students like this, so that you are able to pour from your full cup. You can't help the student if you aren't in a good place mentally either. What do you do if this is not taken seriously by the guardians? So when you contact administration is going to contact the parents or the guardians. If this concern is not taken seriously, if they don't respond appropriately, then the police may be contacted to bring the student to the hospital. When the student gets to the hospital, they're going to have to undergo a assessment. The school district of the teacher that I interviewed, actually, they have trauma-based training. They have a special suicide portfolio counselor that is available 24/7. So no matter what time the police go and take the child to the hospital, the suicide portfolio counselor will meet them there. This ensures that the student does not feel alone, especially if the guardians are not being supportive. The child will go through that assessment, and if the child is deemed fit to go home, the counselor and the police will have to decide if this is safe because of the unsupportive guardians. If the guardians are able to be supportive through different resources, then the child may go home, but if not, MCFD may need to be contacted. Are there any mental health practices that you have found helpful? So the teacher that I interviewed found the 2x10 method to be a great way of opening up your students to a relationship. So that means that there's 2 minutes a day with each student for 10 days that you indulge them in conversation. So you get to know about them personally. You make sure that you've got that good trusting foundation. There's the wraparound method, which is supported by home, school, and resources. So you make sure that their home is a healthy and supportive atmosphere, that they're able to succeed in school, and that they have access to mental health resources. So this is really important because if the student isn't being supported at home, they're not going to succeed in school. If they're not succeeding at school, they might not feel comfortable at school, and therefore they might not feel comfortable at home. They need to have these mental health resources in both areas. They need to have somewhere they can go to talk about any feelings such as this, suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, a plan. They need to have access to the resources. So I just wanted to do a quick reflection on my interview. I found it to be really informative about the process that follows a disclosure. I feel like going into this next practicum, I'm more prepared. I'm more confident in myself dealing with this kind of disclosure if it does happen again. I feel like it won't impact me as emotionally as it did the first time, as I know that it comes from a place of a child reaching out for help, and after reporting, that child is going to have the resources and the help that they need. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I'm going to now hand it over to Tony.
Thank you very much, Freya. So I interviewed a youth care worker. The counseling process that I used first to begin to assess the situation. Then we explored deeper into the concerns and understanding behaviors with clear goals that are set up between the client, the counselor, and the confidants. Once the information was gathered, there was an opportunity for an informed decision to be made with evaluation that supports all parties involved, creating a collaborative intervention. Here are some of the questions I have asked our counselor and how they would deal with this situation. The first question was, as a youth care worker, where would you start? Where would be the first person, or who would be the first person to contact about what was discovered in the student's poem? So as teachers start to understand the situation, we need to know if there was a duty to report. We want to know how would we approach the student in this troubling time as ways to support this student and in our school, in our care. The youth care worker's response, they wanted to start with a one-on-one conversation with the kid, assessing what led them to write what they did. If it was necessary, as we wanted to let the student know, as well as the parents, to create the safety plan if it was needed. While we were assessing the student, we wanted to acknowledge what triggered the student to write these poems. So as my next question, what are some clues to watch for in some of the students' work for potential threatening situations? These are great ways to detect an authentic and key details to help affect a child's life and supply a safe learning environment. As a youth care workers, they wanted to know if there was any violent references, as well as any vulnerable comments that was made in their work. This may attribute to any personal challenges or situations that might have caused this reaction or this student to feel this way. Some ways for us to detect in the classroom. Usually high risk times are at the end of the school year when a lot of emotions are coming up for the students. Teachers need to also be aware if there are uses of drugs and alcohol. If it might seem unorthodox to think about that for elementary school students, but the problem still could arise. Some ways are extensive preoccupation with death fantasies. This is more prevalent in today's world, because I believe kids are playing more video games that promote these kind of fantasies. So for us to be more of aware what is happening, or what children are involved playing these kind of these games, as well as having an absence of support systems. These are great little tips to clue into with our students, as well as having building that rapport with our students allows us to see if they have the available means to carry out the plan, if there are access to medicine cabinets, as well as dangerous weapons or harmful substances in their home, as well as if there is a history of self-destructive acts within their family, possibly a history with a relative having committed suicide, as well as gestures on part of the child that may be interpreted as cries for help, such as significant mood changes from depression into alienation, as well as noticing changes in their appearance and their academic performances. These are little tips that we can always look out for in our students, as well as we can always ask our colleagues if they are watching for some of these in our students in care as well. My next question focuses more on what should new teachers expect when reaching out for help with the student. So when we are talking to our colleagues or administration, but it is important to know the protocols and the perspectives in dealing with this type of conflict. So if we are seeking feedback from other colleagues, we still need to maintain our confidentiality. There may also be an obligation to let the administration know of our situation, with the parents and guardians being informed as well. It's also important to keep in mind that urban children are at greater risk than rural children and certain minority groups such as Indigenous and Native Americans. They have that teachers are because teachers are sometimes involved in programs to deal with the aftermath of suicides in schools, a potentially devastating event for survivors who often receive very little attention. As with any tragedy occurs, teachers should spend some time in class allowing the children to talk about their issues. It's important to provide a sense of continuality, sending the message that life goes on in the face of terrible tragedies. My next question focuses more on, are there any mental health lessons that the counselor have found to be helpful in creating an open and honest atmosphere around asking for help? I will also talk about some trauma-informed practices that are commonly used in schools today. So my rationale for asking this question was, it's great for us as new teachers to always be inquiring about more mental health awareness trainings and professional development. So the youth care workers' response was letting your students know that it is normal to feel these emotions, while normalizing emotions such as anxiety, sadness. Students start to feel comfortable in exhibiting and feeling comfortable enough to speak about those issues within the classroom, while emphasizing that mental health is just as important as physical health. Especially in schools, teachers are important to provide a sense of continuality, while we wanted to send this message that life goes on. As I previously stated in our last slide, it is important for some trauma-informed practices that we can have in our classroom about talks about anxiety, or having possibly third-party guest speakers, elders that come into our classroom that can provide experiences with outside resources. Also, agencies that are supporting the building that we're working in, as well as educating the teachers during our professional development days. These are all great common practices that we're seeing more and more. My next question, what would you do as as a youth care worker if the student's claims the student does not actually feel these suicidal emotions? This is great question to ask because I wanted to know ways to communicate with students that are reluctant to talk freely about their emotions. So we wanted not to forget that we also needed to debrief our crisis intervention with not only myself, but with other new teachers, as well as counselors and principals that can help validate as I start to listen and formulate my ways or my protocols. So as the counselor's response, they wanted to receive the firsthand from the student directly. They wanted to know what, in their words, and why they wrote what they did before relying on others as assumptions. So my reflection on these kind of questions that I asked the counselor was, if teachers um, teachers, as with any other tragedy that occurs, we always need to take our time and patience with the students. We need to build that relationship as we move forward so that we feel comfortable in expressing the feelings that we get as well. So being good role models extends into our teachings. So now I'd like to move over to our principal interviews. Harvey's going to now talk on the questions that he asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I was tasked with interviewing an elementary school principal for our scenario, and I will continue to our question here. Okay. The first question I asked the principal was, who would be the first person to contact about what was discovered in the student's poem, and what are the protocols that a student should undertake to deal with the situation? So the principal's reply was that the first point of contact should be a lead supervisor, contact principal, or maybe or a vice principal, and that the documentation is imperative as soon as the teacher finds the poem. Also notifying the parents and guardians to open up the lines of communication and try to get on the same page for the student's behalf is very important. Create an incident report for documentation along with a progress report. And this file will help to check in on the student's progress and also allow staff and admin to better understand their students at the school. And this is oftenly referred to as a VITRA assessment. And yeah, so on to my next question. I had asked the principal, how can we as educators and administrators support the student through a difficult time? And her response was that to support the student, as this was like a tell or a cry to help them, and just to be aware of these tells, as avoiding these or not noticing these tells may cause tragic consequences. Ensure communication is built with all parties to collaborate and ensure well-being and the safety of the student. And I think we have mentioned this point a few times in our slides, so it is a very important point to get across. We must be dependable and empathetic to the students and checking in on students and working on to build connections, and the trust of our students will go a long way, in especially with situations such like this. Respect the privacy of this incident and the student. This should not be a water cooler conversation, so this should just be very private and just with whatever parties that are necessary, and should not be discussed in public. And slowly redirect student to the school routines to allow them to adjust to a continuation of their learning. So if the situation is serious enough where school might have to be on the back burner for a bit, that's fine. But as long as we can try to get that student back on that routine to kind of continue on with life and just kind of continue their learning, will be a positive thing for that student. And so on to my next question. Ask the principal, as a principal, what would your role and your responsibility be in a situation such like this? And she had stated that it would be to immediately inform the parents and get them on board to provide a safety net for the student. And for also just to try to ensure that the student has a good support at home. And this can be tricky, but it is necessary just to ensure that everyone is on that same page. We also have a duty of care to determine the level of severity, and an incident such like this would be taken very seriously and dealt with immediately. And it is very important to understand that we are obligated by the law to ensure duty of care for our students. So we just have to be really cognizant of that. Also, she had mentioned to observe the change in baseline behavior, which is, I think, important as well. Also, as I mentioned before, having a detailed threat assessment, a VITRA assessment, and this will just help school staff identify any students that might have had a history, and it's just a good knowledge base just to have in the administration. And also to identify and manage manage any other students that may be indicating signs of suicide or extreme behavior change. And these behavior changes can occur just in appearances or academic behaviors, a radical turn in grades maybe. And these are usually the first signs of a student trying to express what's going on in their lives. So we got to really pay attention to these tells. And on to my next question. As the principal, would this incident mandate more mental health awareness and training in the school? And what are a few examples, if any, that they may recommend? She said it would be definitely imperative to raise awareness in our school, especially in the beginning of the school year, to educate and remind the students of mental health awareness. And I think it's important that it is in the beginning of the year because everyone's coming fresh into school. So it's what better way to educate them on mental health awareness and right away when they get into that building. The specific school, also her response was that the specific school where this principal is at has a nurse and a clinician, which is a resource that many schools do not have the luxury of having. And I thought that was really interesting because I know a lot of schools that don't have this luxury. So I thought that was neat that there are resources like that available in some places. Also, she had stated that their school has presentations about mental health and school-based teams also meet up on a regular basis to improve and innovate their school-based support. And this is just to simply ensure that everyone is working towards supporting the students at the school. And the next question, I asked the principal, how does the school community enable positive relations and communication with parents and guardians to collaboratively work with school staff together to ensure the safety and well-being of the distressed student? The principal had stated that the school staff must take initiative to check in with the parent and student regularly and to build on this imminent solution. Also encourage to communicate with the parents and just to find out how the student is doing at home, just to ensure that the behaviors at school and home are they similar, are they different? So it's just another way just to gather information. And also just to communicate your main concern that it is for the well-being of that student and just show empathy. So it makes you more human and it shows that you care. And I know I had mentioned this before, but it is important, so I'll mention it again. Respect the privacy of the student and the suicide note. This should not be discussed in public. And yeah, it's a very delicate situation, and we as professionals have to respect and honor what's going on in our schools, and we just cannot disclose this to people we come across. And then just onto my reflection. Overall, I believe educating students and staff in our school community is essential to identify these signs to ensure that student safety is being ensured by producing these mental health awareness presentations. And in this case, being situationally aware and observe cues, and also watch for any drastic change in behavior that students may tell. And also, students can also play a vital role to help and alert potential risks, as staff may not be able to see and hear everything that transpires in and out of the school community. And so we can really use students as an assistance to prevent any tragedies from occurring. And it just kind of reminded me with just my principal's responses about the mental health awareness. It just reminded me of Nadia's presentation that we were fortunate enough to get in our class on mental health awareness. And I really believe that schools and districts need to use resources and advocates such like Nadia to bring about this awareness and to pick apart these pick up on these cues, and just to really build empathy around the school community, so everyone's looking out for everyone, whether if they actually like each other or not. You're still there for the person, and you're still being observant and making sure that everyone is still all right in your school. And yeah, thank you. That was my interview, and I will pass this on to Emily now. Thank you.
Hello. So I interviewed a First Nations support worker in an elementary school. She also worked as an EA for a number of years. My first question was, who would be your first person to contact about what was discovered in the student's phone? So my expert said to contact my administration, the principal, vice principal, right away, no matter the time. And this is in line with what we've been hearing from everyone else and from what we've heard in classes. Contact your administration. She also brought up the Ministry of Children and Family Development, MCFD. She said that in many communities, there's a negative history and association there. And it's your duty to report, but you need to be aware of this. So yeah, just be aware when you're reporting, if you have to report. For my next question, I asked, how would you approach the student about this, and when would you? So that unless you have a relationship, you do not approach the student. If you approach the student and you do not have a relationship with them, at best, you're not going to get any information from them. At worst, you're going to be detrimental to the situation. That being said, if you have a rapport with them, you would approach them as soon as possible. She did warn me that in a 6-7, for 6-7s, they may not want to talk to you. They're at an age where they're beginning to feel they should be independent, and they're wanting to take control. They may not feel like they have a lot of control. That's sometimes where suicide comes from. And they may not want to give up what they have to disclose to you further. Overall, she told me to trust my instincts. You know the student, in theory, you will be able to have some rapport and relationship with them. If you do not have a relationship with the student, you should find a trusted adult in the school. Her school didn't have a counselor, but that's also a good idea, is to find a counselor. For my next question, I asked, how do you make the student feel safe enough to continue expressing themselves? How do you avoid making them feel threatened or self-conscious? So she told me that I had to be honest about the disclosure, but try to reassure them that unless the information they told me needed to be disclosed, it would remain confidential. So don't tell them that everything is going to stay between them, because that's not realistic. And when they find out that you disclosed, you've eroded their trust in you and also in every other adult in the school they come in contact with. And that will just make the situation worse. So be honest and upfront. She also said to give them choices. They may not feel like they have a lot of choices right now if they're considering suicide. So giving them that little bit of control and choice may be beneficial. And you have to make them feel supported. This is a tricky balance. We discussed previously in the program that you cannot be everything to a student. You have to let other professionals do their job. But the student still needs to know that even though they're not talking to you about this, that you still want to help them, that you're still on their side. So this will be dependent on you having a relationship with the student for you to be able to communicate that. For the next slide, for my next question, I asked, would this mandate more mental health awareness lessons? And how would you do this without making the student feel self-conscious? So yes, you would do lessons because chances are at least one other student is having similar thoughts. That student is going to know that they brought this about, no matter how, even if it was pre-planned and it's just a coincidence, they're going to think that they brought this about. You can't avoid it. My expert said to talk to them and reassure them that no one's going to know that this is because of them. You're not going to tell any of their classmates. The only people you're going to tell about this are trusted adults. She also said to try and frame it that they're helping their classmates because they disclosed. Their classmates now get this opportunity to learn and be supported in a way that they maybe weren't. Personally, I think that no matter what, the student's going to be self-conscious and it's going to be a very delicate situation. You're going to have to be empathetic and aware of how they're feeling. And you're just going to have to use your rapport to support them and guide them and make them feel that they're not alone. So for my last question, I asked if a student is Indigenous, does anything change? Short answer is yes, it does. So suicide is disproportionately higher in Indigenous communities and with Indigenous youth. And this is due to the history of colonialism, intergenerational trauma, etc. There's a lot of discussion around solutions for this issue, but there's still a lot of room for growth, she said. They're not perfect. They're more and more, the longer this goes on, the more solutions they'll come up with. She also mentioned MCFD again. So MCFD does not have a good reputation within Indigenous communities due to the past and current mistakes. My expert said that students can benefit from family and cultural support, but they are sometimes removed unnecessarily, in her opinion. She's not a social worker. There are supports that can be given by MCFD that don't involve the removal of the child, but if they deem the child to be threatened in that home, they will be removed. Obviously, my expert was not advocating for students to remain in dangerous situations. She's just pointing out that MCFD is not a solution that has no consequences. I'm going to argue that everyone within MCFD is doing their best and they want what's best for their students. They don't want them to come to harm, but mistakes are made and sometimes choices have no good options. You cannot assume that involving the ministry will always improve the situation because it won't. It doesn't mean you shouldn't contact them. You have a duty to report, but you need to be aware of the history and you need to be aware of all the things that may happen, just so you can support the student further. So, a reflection. I learned a lot from my expert. I'd never considered MCFD before. That's probably ignorance on my part. And overall, I just got a sense that you need to have a great relationship with your students in order to help them. And this is when they disclose, that is not the end of the issue for you or for them. That is the beginning of a long journey, but they get to take that journey and they may not have if you hadn't acted. Their journey might have ended at 13. Okay, so we are moving on to a problem solution slide. Yeah, the main point for mine is that you need to have a relationship with the student, which I already discussed, and I'm going to pass that on to Freya.
So, talking about solutions, I want to reiterate the importance of teacher mental health and demonstrating good mental health practices. So once again, with the 2x10, 2 minutes every day for 10 days with each student. I want to emphasize how important it is to get the administration involved, not only because that's your duty, but because you have that support to help that student. Let the students know right at the beginning of the year that it is okay to ask for help. Be transparent when they do disclose that you have access to those extra supports. Demonstrate healthy patterns in your class. So one way that my practicum teacher did this was once a day, the student would pick a color and they would stick their popsicle stick with like a little Velcro piece on a color, and that would explain their mood for the day. So red was angry, blue was sad, and you just use those zones. It practices the students' awareness of their own emotions, and it could help them figure out how to regulate those emotions as well. I'm going to be passing this on to Tony, who will talk about his solutions.
Thank you, Freya. So my big reflection on our interview was children who attempt students who attempt the suicide, usually they tell someone about their intent. It might be a friend, a parent, a peer in their classroom or in their school as well. But by alerting the children of the risk, we can help recruit them in their assistance in preventing future tragedies as well. So, but keeping in mind that when we have to try and predict these emotions in students, that it's not an exact kind of science. It's always better to be cautious and conservative, thinking of the child first when anytime we need to deal with this kind of threatening situation. Always asking for help is never a wrong thing to do, but asking the right people for help is the important thing to keep in mind. So passing this on to Harvey to finish with his solution from his interview.
Thanks, Tony. What I really took away from our scenario and our questions or our answers, were I really the need to educate our schools and our students about mental health awareness. I honestly believe that promoting this type of learning in our school communities will help prevent any tragedies from occurring. And we have to, in order to identify these cues and tells, we have to educate ourselves. So it's very important. And also just the importance of documentation and going through the proper procedures. This is something I'd like. Obviously, I knew documentation is very important, but just all the steps that you have to undertake in a situation like this, I just feel like it's a good knowledge to have when we're going into our future practicums and into our future careers. And yeah, so I would like to thank everyone for listening to our presentation, and I hope you guys enjoyed, guys and girls enjoyed it. Thank you very much.